Welcome to our Zoffee for Monday, May 25th, 2020. And today we're going to be talking about Cleantech in Canada. And with us, we've got Joanna Kyriazis from Clean Energy Canada. So welcome to the Zoffee, Joanna.
Thanks, Markham. Thanks for having me.
Look, you and I have, I've interviewed you once or twice before about Cleantech, and I know that Clean Energy Canada has done quite a bit of research on the size of it, its growth, and so on, its potential in particular. Why don't we start this Zoffee off with just telling, if you could give us a definition of what exactly Cleantech is, and what are some of the types of companies that comprise Cleantech?
Sure. So clean technology refers to any technology, could be a good or a service or even a process that reduces negative environmental impacts and helps us to use our resources and our energy more efficiently.
Excellent. Could you give us some examples of companies that are Cleantech?
Sure. So Canada, we do particularly well in kind of clean tech companies focused on energy and power. So that might mean carbon capture and storage technology, either capturing carbon from big industrial processes or storing it in materials like concrete, cement. We also have a number of leading companies that work on electricity grid management. So, smart, you hear the term smart grid. It's taking electricity from the sources and sending it to where it needs in the most efficient way, whether it's, towards electric vehicle charging stations or to commercial buildings in the day, but then residential homes in the evening. We also do very well on kind of resource-focused clean technologies. So what are some examples? We have a number of companies focused on, water, clean water treatment to take industrial wastewater and turn it into something useful.
I have a friend in Calgary, Amanda Hall. She's the CEO of Summit Nanotech, and she was a geologist for many years with CNRL, so she comes out of kind of an oil and gas, but also a mining background because she was working on their oil sands mines. And she created a little company a couple of years ago that clearly fits in the clean tech space, and it's a nanotube filter for filtering lithium out of briny fluids. And you would think that maybe because there are other companies that are doing this as well, which she would be filtering the lithium out of oil and gas produced water, which does contain small amounts of minute amounts of lithium. But she's actually selling her technology to mining companies in Chile, and where the briny water from their aquifers it's more salty and it has more lithium in it, higher concentration, and her stuff works really well for that application. And that really excites me, because when I see really smart entrepreneurial people Canadians who see an opportunity, they go for it, and it has an application in a different but related field, and maybe even in other countries, I think, man, we should do more of that.
Absolutely. And I think when a lot of people think about clean tech, they only focus on kind of startups coming up with these emerging solutions like the Hyperloop or, very futuristic, somewhat inaccessible types of solutions. But clean tech really does create opportunities in more traditional sectors, like you said, mining. In Canada, we have a lot of the metals and materials needed to go into or that are required for clean technologies like solar panels, electric vehicle batteries. We also have a lot of opportunities around lower carbon building materials. And so I mentioned kind of lower carbon concrete. We also have some leadership in lower carbon aluminum, sustainable timber materials. These can feed into large buildings, electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So there's a lot of potential for partnerships and clustering around our traditional industries, auto, mining, oil and gas, and then also our these kind of up and coming startups and emerging technologies.
I'm going to bore you for a couple of minutes here, so I apologize. 25 years ago or so, actually, I was involved in a project in Saskatchewan with the utility, power utility there, and they wanted a diversification strategy. They wanted to know how they could stimulate the investment in new businesses and what role of an electrical utility could play. So I worked with a number of economists, and they did this input-output model where they looked at the inputs into their resource industry, so tractors or fertilizer, whatever it would be, and then they looked at forward linkages, which are using what you make, like you produce grain and then you maybe make flour, so flour is a forward linkage, and then they looked at technology linkages. So you develop like the Amanda's nanotube filter, that would be a technology linkage. And one of the things that stuck with me from that work is that there is so much opportunity if we use our resource industries as what the economists call a growth pole, and then we systematically exploit the linkages, the forward, the backward, the technology linkages from those. We can do a tremendous amount of work diversifying our economy, building new startups and new technologies and so on, using what we do best as the foundation. And is that kind of what's happening here? That was my takeaway from your previous comment.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing that. And I think that's the best way to ensure kind of a more resilient clean technology sector in Canada, right? One of the biggest barriers that our clean tech sector faces is the valley of death, where they have trouble going from the innovation lab to scaling up on a commercial scale. And that's in part because we have a smaller domestic market and we have a more risk-averse market. And so anytime that we can get our own companies and our own governments using Canadian clean technology and having that supply chain going from our mining sector or our ag sector through to the end use, then yeah, that's sort of an integrated and diversified clean economy.
I'd like to address this valley of death because that is, it came up in a study by the School of Public Policy 3 or 4 years ago about partial upgrading of bitumen. So when you ship bitumen in a pipeline, you have to add 30% of diluent, so some light hydrocarbon that doesn't have the same value as the other the bitumen that you're shipping. And they came up, there are about like 10 partial upgrading technologies where instead of turning it into like a really synthetic oil, you turn it into from an ultra heavy bitumen into a heavy or medium crude that will then flow in the pipeline. It doesn't need the diluent. So you could, in theory, free up 30% of your pipeline capacity without, and you wouldn't add any more pipelines. You could ship another 600,000 or 1 million barrels a day without doing that. And the problem with that technology is that it got to the point where it was facing the valley of death. The work had been done in the lab. Maybe there was a little pilot project or demonstration project to show that the technology worked, but where does the capital come to scale it up to commercial production? Great technology, but it's either not, well, maybe not dying on the vine, but it's not expanding as quickly as it could because the Kenney government canceled a $2 billion program to help those companies over the valley of death. So given that this is a serious problem in developing new technologies, what is Canada doing to bridge the valley of death in the clean tech sector?
Well, I think sending some clear policy signals, first of all, putting in place smart climate policies like a carbon tax, for instance, and then making sure that we're sending clear signals to industry that we're going to follow through with those policies and regulations and have a plan to continue to increase their ambition over time. that can really help companies and investors make kind of longer term investment decisions. And a place where you really are seeing that is in British Columbia. They've had a carbon tax since 2007. And, in conversations with companies like Teck Resources, the large mining company, they have extra costs because of the carbon tax. Upwards of $1 million a year, I think I heard them say. And so they are testing different Canadian clean technologies to help reduce those emissions and those costs. They are piloting some of the MineSense technologies. I know a lot of folks are familiar with that by now, but it's another BC-based company, MineSense, and it uses sensors in some of the larger mining vehicle shovels, so that when it picks up a pile of dirt, it can sense how much iron ore is in that pile and whether it's worth processing or not. If it's not worth it, they throw it back down. If it is, they'll actually go and do the work of processing. So yeah, Teck Resources is piloting that clean technology, and then is also ordering some Canada-made electric buses. I believe it was from Lion Electric, a Quebec company that makes electric school buses. And it was shuttling its employees to the mine sites using electric buses. That's a great example of a company that, it definitely, has a public-facing commitment to lowering its emissions and doing well on climate targets, but it also is doing this to reduce its costs under the policy and regulatory environment that BC has had in place for a while.
Let's talk about the Trudeau government, because I think the signals are pretty clear that in the post-COVID-19 recovery strategy that climate policy will play a large role, and that investments in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving environmental performance will play a very big role in that strategy. What might we see out of the Trudeau government in terms of support for clean tech?
So I made a list of some of the kind of key sectors that I have been hearing the most about. Everybody and their brother is racing to provide clean stimulus recommendations. And so the federal government, and I'm sure many provincial governments, are just bombarded, and they're trying to work through what are the best ideas. So here are some of the ones that I think we're going to see. First is under the buildings category, large-scale retrofits of existing buildings to make them more energy efficient and more resilient to extreme weather events like flooding. I know that there have been calls to focus specifically on commercial buildings, schools, and public buildings, more so than residential, because everybody's working from home, and so there's a lot of vacant school and commercial buildings right now that could be worked on. Under the transportation category, there have been a lot of calls to invest in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We need to make sure that we have a coast-to-coast network of EV charging infrastructure, but we also really need to increase charging infrastructure in dense urban areas and strategic areas like airports. So Ubers or electric taxis could charge up while they're waiting for passengers. A really good place to start there is installing EV chargers in all government parking lots. It's under government control. It can act quickly, and our conversations with EV charging providers say they're ready to meet that demand if and when those investments are made. Another area is electrifying public transportation. The federal government made this 5,000 electric bus commitment. It's in the Minister of Infrastructure's mandate letter. I think there's a lot of questions right now about what public transit is going to look like in a post-COVID world, and people are afraid to ride. So there's going to be a lot of changes and investment and focus in rethinking that model. while we're doing that, let's electrify. Transit investments last 10 to 20 years, and we need to create healthier communities with less tailpipe emissions. So that's another area where a lot of folks are calling for some clean stimulus spending. Quickly, in terms of electricity, we need to continue building our renewable energy generation capacity, hydro, wind, solar, and storage, to make sure those can, be used. That electricity can be used when it's needed, and then also transmission infrastructure to make sure we're taking the clean electricity surplus that we have in some provinces like Manitoba, Quebec, BC, and delivering it to neighboring jurisdictions who need it. And then finally, maybe just finally some targeted clean tech investments. 4 areas I've heard lots about: hydrogen, geothermal, cleaner fuels, including biofuel for jets, and carbon capture, use and storage. Those have been getting lots of attention.
That's a fairly extensive list, and it is extensive. One thing that we had Josipa Petrucic from QTRIC on here talking about electrification of transportation, and one of my big takeaways from her Zoffee was that we shouldn't focus just on those things that are highly visible and sexy, like Teslas. That in fact, if you're going to invest public money, there's a very good argument that the money is better spent and you get a higher return on your investment for your public dollars if you spend it in unsexy areas like public transportation, delivery vans, garbage trucks. Because in this particular case, electrification of transportation, you're talking about vehicles that are working 8, 10, 12, sometimes 24 hours a day. They're often driven, propelled by diesel engines, so they're also spewing particulates and other things into the air. And you get for an average, family car runs 4% of the time. Whereas, some of these other, like a taxi, might run 60, 70, 80% of the time. So you actually get a better return on some of these unsexy areas. What's your take on that?
Well, first I would say these are sexy areas. I've drinking the electric bus Kool-Aid. I think it's really important for public transportation to have an electric focus, because people see those electric buses going. It's climate action in motion. It's an investment that has a more equitable reach as well, right? Like there's no first class bus or subway car. Like all Canadians, millions of Canadians rely on public transportation. And we hear that riders across the board prefer electric buses. They're quieter, they're cleaner, especially electric school buses, or who doesn't love electric school buses where kids can get on a cleaner bus. Also, I want to say, if we could get a noise-free electric garbage truck to be going through our neighborhoods, there would be a lot of people who'd be in support of that, would help our babies stay asleep during nap time. So I actually do think that these are kind of sexier solutions that reach a lot more people, and a lot more people see that climate action in motion. And then there are some really compelling numbers out there in terms of investments in public transportation and how many kind of jobs per dollar you get. It's far beyond investments in road infrastructure.
That's a great segue into my next, and it'll be our final question, and then we'll open it up to our Zoffee folks. So if you're watching, please think about a question. But that is the number of jobs and the types of jobs, because I think the number of jobs in Canadian clean tech is much higher than people think it is. And secondly, it strikes me, and I'd be interested to know if this is true, that a lot of these jobs are high-paying technical jobs. They'd be engineering jobs, designing jobs, finance jobs, those kinds of things. Is that a fair thing to say?
Well, I think so. The studies that we've done are around kind of the clean energy sector, and Yes, around as of 2018, I think it was about 300,000 Canadians are employed in the clean energy sector. Our projections to 2030 is that amount will double. It'll be over 500,000 Canadians. So it's a huge chunk of Canadians, and also it's Canadians in every province and territory across Canada, right? It's not necessarily concentrated in one region. Um, so yes, there are the professional kind of service provider jobs, like you talked about, engineering and and sustainable finance, but there's also blue collar jobs in there, like construction and building insulation for more energy efficient buildings, the electricians who are installing electric vehicle chargers. What else? The folks who are working on electricity transmission lines, to make sure that we're getting clean electricity to our homes and businesses. So that's the beautiful thing with clean energy. It really spreads the kind of the economic benefit in terms of region and in terms of job type.
Terrific. Okay, folks, if you could put up your little blue hand, and we'll let you ask a question of Joanna, and we will no doubt she will have insightful answers for you. So, Joanna, are we seeing different types of clean tech in different regions? I know that things are spread out on the provinces fairly equitably, but are we seeing, like in Alberta, would you have clean tech that's more geared to oil and gas extraction, and in say BC, maybe to mining and forestry, maybe in Quebec, say, you might have something tied to hydropower, because you've got lots and lots of cheap, clean hydro. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, to some extent, we're seeing some clustering around kind of the incumbent industries, but I would say not necessarily. When you look at our kind of hydrogen fuel cell technology, we've got Corvus Energy in BC provides electric, or let's say battery and hydrogen fuel cell technology. Corvus Energy in BC helps provide technology to electric ferries. But then we've also got some hydrogen providers in Ontario, who are, I guess one other piece to consider here is a good chunk of these companies are export oriented. Nearly 80% of their businesses their technology provision is going out of our borders, and so it's not necessary that they need to link up with the type of economic activity that's going on in their particular province. But certainly there's a lot more focus on carbon capture and storage in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I'm not sure if there's more biofuel development in the prairies as compared to elsewhere. I know there's a lot of biofuel development in Ontario and Quebec as well. So it's fairly widespread.
Right. Well, we've got Dave Patterson, who coincidentally happens to be an electrical engineer. So we'll unmute. Dave, if you could unmute your microphone and ask your question, please.
Hi, good information. So I'm wondering how the electric bus program is going. Do you have any sort of numbers as to, what's being installed and what's in the pipeline?
Sure. So Canada still has relatively few electric buses on the road. The leading jurisdictions are TTC in Toronto, TransLink in BC, City of Edmonton, STM in Montreal. But I think, TTC is only integrating still about 40 electric buses. Like we're in the hundreds. Still have a long way to go until we get to that 5,000 mark. But if you even just looking at TransLink and BC Transit in BC, they both have strategies to completely turn over their fleets in the next 10 years and replace, 600 or 700 diesel and hybrid buses for them to become electric. And a number of those jurisdictions also have set targets where they will not be buying diesel buses at all in new procurements by 2025 or earlier. So in short, still in the early phases, but we are poised to both our large transit authorities and our smaller ones there's a lot of buy-in and commitment to electrifying public transportation.
Joanna, before we get to the next question, I want to bring this up because this has become, I think, a part of Energy Media's approach to where we should go in the future, and that is, as we, if we're going to invest public dollars, whether federal or provincial, into lowering our emissions and cleaning up our environmental performance, we should do it strategically. So not only do we get GHG emissions, but we also support the development of the Canadian industry, Canadian businesses that are part of that. And China does that really well. That's why they're into electric vehicles in such a big ways, because they looked at it and went, well, why would we develop a really big automotive industry when we can leapfrog that old technology and we can become leaders in electric vehicles? We already have a supply chain around electronics and so on, so we're ideally positioned for that. And I think that we need to make the best use of the money that we put into clean tech so that we A, achieve our climate objectives, but B, also develop new businesses, new markets, new companies, and so on. So your take on that, please.
I agree. This, the COVID crisis and the economic downturn that is resulting, like the top priority is providing relief and creating jobs and making sure our economy stays afloat. When we are thinking about our recovery, we want to make sure that we're building the economy that we want when it comes, but in 2040, right? Like, what does that economy look like? And so we sort of have a 4-part strategy of how we want to do that. One is training our workforce to make sure that we have the skills and know-how needed to build that economy. Number 2 is retooling our industries to make sure that they will remain competitive in a net zero world. And so, when you're looking at any given investment, will it make our industries more competitive in the future? Seeing where global trends are going or not. The 3rd pillar is building clean. So using those lower carbon materials that we have right here in Canada, low carbon aluminum, low carbon concrete, sustainable timber. And then the 4th one is sending those clear policy signals that I talked about. But absolutely, we need to be thoughtful. We keep talking about the difference between a shovel-ready project and a shovel-worthy project. We shouldn't just be rushing to get any project up and running quickly. We should make sure what we're doing is worth building. And so one quick example I want to point to is we talk a lot about building up our electric vehicle manufacturing sector for passenger vehicles. Canada is a huge laggard when it comes to passenger EVs. But then there's the question of, is that a comparative advantage for us? Like, should we really force the assembly of electric vehicles here if it doesn't make sense? We are already leading on electric buses and trucks. Maybe that's the industries to further cultivate.
I couldn't agree more. I've got an energy vision coming up for electrification of transportation, and the big idea in that piece is going to be that we focus our investments around electrification of transportation on the work side of things, the heavy duty side of things, and not invest in the light duty, medium duty side, like cars and half-ton pickup trucks, that sort of thing. So James Van Leeuwen, you're up next. If you could ask your question of Joanna, please.
Sure, thanks, Markham, and hi, Joanna.
Hi, James.
That was almost a perfect segue to the question that I have, which harkens back to your comment about the 2 essential challenges we face in Canada around having a small domestic market and risk-averse capital. So Markham is agreeing with you that we need to be focusing our investments on, where we has strategic advantage. How do we mobilize the investment here in Canada that we have? And if we can't do that effectively, what are our options, in terms of attracting investment from elsewhere? Can you comment on whatever kind of strategy you're associated with that is focused on that?
Absolutely. So one approach that we have been big supporters of at Clean Energy Canada is using the power of government procurement. So federal and provincial governments have huge purchasing power, and they have also set fairly ambitious targets when it comes to reducing emissions in their buildings, in their vehicle fleets, in their infrastructure projects. And so Canadian governments need to do better acting as a test bed and deploying our own Canadian clean tech solutions to verify that they work, show corporate Canada and our potential trade partners that these are verified solutions, and help those companies scale up. I know that Export Development Canada has also been moving forward with a clean technology strategy, providing financing, kind of targeted financing to promising companies, and then helping to shop our Canadian clean tech solutions abroad. So that's another form of assistance that government has been providing, trying to get our clean technology products to global markets.
Joanna, what do you think of green bonds backed by in full or in part by either the federal government or provincial government, but green bonds that the funds could be used to invest in clean tech companies? Is that one of your strategies?
We're definitely in support of green bonds. The Canada Infrastructure Bank that's a highly underused asset, and so even connecting back to the last question there, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank could be doing a lot more in supporting some of our clean technologies and making kind of more strategic investments. In terms of green bonds, I guess it depends on who you're trying to raise capital from. If it's institutional investors, they're likely to be more risk averse. If it's, I know there's some innovative approaches, like a company called CoPower. They issue green bonds and attract retail investors. I have some green bonds with them, but again, they're going for really much lower risk projects. I think we've done well trying to invest more venture capital to our Canadian clean tech sector. And in 2019, we actually captured 3% of global venture capital, which is kind of an outsized proportion given our contribution to global GDP. So I think that's a good strategy. I'm not yet sure if green bonds are the right approach.
Okay, good information to have. Dr. Joe Vipond, if you could unmute your mic and ask your question, please.
Great information session here. I really love it. If you could wave a policy wand and create the magical policy that would move things forward, is there such a single policy? Like, is there something we should all be rowing towards, or are we really requiring a vast suite of policies to make the clean tech sector happier?
I mean, the single most effective policy is a carbon price. It would cover the entire economy, and it sends a signal that makes clean technologies more desirable, because companies need to be implementing them to reduce their emissions and improve efficiency. And then as that demand increases, then those technologies can, take advantage of economies of scale, and their costs start to drop. So that's the clearest, simplest, most effective. Economists love it. Politicians hate it, of course, but that would be the top policy solution that I would support. And then it's going to be a suite. The Clean Fuel Standard, the federal Clean Fuel Standard, is another big one. We've seen delay after delay, and the government announced again that the draft Clean Fuel Standard regulation is going to be delayed because we want to make sure we get it right. But that one is really important to target our transportation sector and make sure that we have cleaner fuels available to meet some of the needs where electrification can't do it. I've been focusing a lot on airline emissions, and airlines are in trouble right now. They're asking for bailouts, and so there's been a lot of conversations around what does a green bailout for airlines look like. They need a lot of help with research and development around biofuel that is going to be commercially viable for long haul flights. So yeah, I think carbon price is the best one, but yeah, we're going to still need a package depending on which clean technologies we want to support and scale up.
A quick note on policy levers. From my point of view, there are generally three. One would be the carbon pricing, two would be regulations, three would be subsidies. So if you think of a suite of policies designed to stimulate the clean tech sector, and you thought of policy levers in those three areas, it's a handy way to kind of organize our thinking about a policy for anything, but particularly in clean tech. So Dave Patterson, you've got another question for Joanna. If you could unmute your mic and ask your question, please.
So in Germany, the German post office was looking for electric vans, delivery vehicles, and they went to Volkswagen, and of course Volkswagen blew them off. So they've actually started assembling their own electric vehicles from almost electric putt-putts to vans, and it's assembly. They just buy all the parts from an OEM and they assemble them. They're not really manufacturing an electric vehicle, and I think they're even marketing that sort of program to other companies or countries. So is there any hint that the Canadian Post Office might leverage some of the automaking facilities in Ontario or wherever to electrify their fleet?
Fleets. So we have a company called Lion Electric in Quebec that makes electric delivery trucks, and they unveiled a Class 8 urban delivery truck about a year ago, and they had plans to put out a Class 6 urban delivery truck, and they actually sped up their production timeline to help meet those last mile delivery needs, because everybody's at home right now getting their groceries and other things delivered to them. We have specifically thought about opportunities related to Canada Post. I've looked at a lot of their public documents. They introduced about 500 hybrid delivery vehicles into their fleet last year. And they say that they understand the future is electric and they need to be investing in lower carbon vehicle options. But I've seen kind of no commitment or conversation around adding electric vehicles to their fleets as of yet. That is one of our clean stimulus recommendations, is to focus on them as a first mover.
Just a final thought on that topic. A couple of years ago, a little Canadian startup built the Bison pickup truck. I don't know if anybody remembers it. We ran a couple of stories on it, and I interviewed the lead engineer on it, and he was talking about how there really would be some terrific applications in the resource industry. So, for instance, you could have a 3/4 ton. That would do welding. It could be a welder's truck. Instead of hauling around a big diesel generator and a tank of diesel with you, you simply run your welder off the truck's battery, and it would have a bigger battery pack for that reason, and you would have terrific torque out in remote areas, and I mean, there's just a whole range of advantages. And that's what I was getting at when I was talking about technology linkages from our resource industries, that we could lever, and then we could look at and say, well, okay, we've made this Bison pickup truck, and we've, you know, it's in forestry in BC, and it's in oil and gas and in the oil sands, and it's in, you know, mining in Ontario. Now, where else do we have in the world is there forestry, mining, and oil and gas production where this Bison truck could be marketed, and we could have a little niche, quite a thriving niche industry. And I think that that's a viable approach to clean tech. And it's one that I would like to see the federal government in particular get behind with both dollars and its other resources to accelerate that, because we can't wait too long. The opportunities that we have that are available to seize, that are coming out of this great, you know, energy technology change that we're seeing, they have a finite lifespan. You know, you can't wait another decade to do this sort of thing. You have to do it now so that you become the leader, or, you know, competitive in that niche. So anyway, my little blathering on how I think where we should go with this. So Joanna, thank you very much for this. It's been fascinating as always, and we'll maybe get you back for a future Zoffee to give us an update on where the government actually did go with its strategy and how that affects clean tech. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for the great conversation, everyone.